The Mechanic Who Changed the Sky. August 17, 1943, WWII Airfield, New Guinea. The tropical heat hung heavy over the muddy runways. The smell of fuel, sweat, and burning oil filled the air. American ground crews worked tirelessly, preparing their P-38 Lightnings for yet another mission over the Pacific. Among them was Technical Sergeant James McKenna, a quiet but brilliant aircraft mechanic. With the 5th Air Force, he wasn't a pilot. He didn't carry a weapon, but his hands stained with grease and burned from engine heat would soon save more American lives than he could ever imagine. The problem: the P-38 Lightning was a masterpiece of engineering, twin engines, turbocharged speed, and heavy firepower. It was the pride of American aviation, yet it had one critical weakness. In a dogfight against the Japanese Zero, the P-38 simply couldn't turn fast enough. The Zero was lighter, more agile, and deadly in close combat. Many American pilots never made it home because of that single flaw. The issue wasn't the engines, the wings, or the pilots. It was the control system itself. The cables that connected the pilot's control stick to the aircraft's ailerons and elevators had just a fraction of slack, 3/8 of an inch. That small delay meant death. When a pilot pulled back to dodge enemy fire, the P-38 responded too late. The Zero was already behind them. The stupid idea. McKenna saw it happen again and again. Pilots he knew, friends he shared breakfast with, didn't return. He read the manuals, checked the regulations, and followed the rules. But deep down, he knew the problem was mechanical, not tactical. Then, one night, as he examined the tension system, he had an idea. A crazy, unauthorized, stupid idea. What if he added just a bit more tension to the cables? What if the stick could react instantly? He took a 6-inch piece of piano wire, cut it by hand, and installed it secretly inside the control linkage, tightening the cables beyond official specifications. It was simple, reckless, and genius. The flight that changed everything. The next morning, one of the pilots, unaware of the modification, took off for a routine mission. As he climbed into the sky, something felt different. The aircraft responded faster, sharper, like it was reading his mind. In combat that day, when Japanese Zeros dove in for the kill, the pilot's P-38 turned harder and faster than ever before. He survived, and he returned with a stunned expression. "What did you do to my bird?" he asked McKenna. Word spread quickly. Pilots were suddenly able to outmaneuver the Zeros, something they'd never done before. The modification wasn't in any manual, wasn't authorized by command, but it worked. The secret that saved lives. McKenna's little wire trick became a legend among the ground crews. Other mechanics began copying it quietly across the Pacific. After the war, the forgotten genius. 1945, the war ends. The guns fell silent. Across the islands of the Pacific, the once busy airfields of WWII and the Solomons stood quiet. The thunder of engines faded, replaced by the sound of waves and the slow return of peace. The men who fought in the skies, the pilots, the mechanics, the dreamers, packed their bags and went home. Among them was Technical Sergeant James McKenna, the man whose stupid little wire trick had quietly saved hundreds of lives. The mechanic returns home. He returned, not as a hero, not as a name etched in stone, but as an ordinary man. No parades, no medals, no recognition, just a worn uniform, a quiet pride, and the knowledge that somewhere out there, dozens of pilots were alive because of his hands. Back home, McKenna found work in a small aircraft maintenance shop. To most, he was just another mechanic tightening bolts and checking gauges. But to the few who knew his story, he was something more, a symbol of the war's hidden brilliance. A man who had changed history with nothing more than a wire and courage. The idea that never died. Years later, aviation engineers studying the performance of the P-38 Lightning discovered something fascinating. A pattern in the control systems of planes that survived the Pacific War. Every one of them had slightly tighter response tolerances, almost identical to McKenna's field modification. His unauthorized fix had unknowingly inspired post-war design philosophy. Eliminate slack, tighten response, trust the pilot. from the early jet fighters of the 1952s to the advanced control systems of modern aircraft. The principle McKenna discovered became standard practice. The feel, a modern fighter jet, that instant reaction between stick and wing, traces its roots back to a single, forgotten mechanic in 1943. The recognition that came too late. For decades, McKenna's name remained buried in squadron logs and forgotten reports. It wasn't until historians in the late 1972s reviewed technical archives that they rediscovered his innovation. Interviews with surviving pilots confirmed it. The wire trick wasn't just rumor, it was real. It had saved lives. Unfortunately, by then, James McKenna had already passed away, never knowing that his act of quiet rebellion had become a piece of aviation legend. But his legacy didn't die with him. Every pilot who turned sharper, every aircraft that responded faster, every mission that succeeded because of precision, all carried a piece of his spirit. Legacy. The story of James McKenna reminds us that not all heroes wear medals or fly planes. Some work in silence, far from the headlines, guided only by instinct, skill, and a stubborn belief that things can be better. He didn't change the world with speeches or orders. He changed it with a 6-inch piece of wire. How the P-38 dominated the skies after 1943. Late 1943, the Pacific War reaches its turning point. For 2 long years, the Japanese Zero ruled the skies. It was faster in turns, lighter in flight, and feared by every Allied pilot who dared to challenge it. But by the end of 1943, something had changed. The P-38 Lightning, once considered too heavy and slow for dogfights, began to strike fear into the Japanese Air Forces. Its silhouette, twin booms, and a central cockpit became the image of death in the Pacific sky. The evolution of a killer. The secret wire modification, born from one mechanic's courage, had turned the P-38 into a new kind of beast. Pilots now had instant control, sharp reaction, and a confidence they had never felt before. Suddenly, the American airmen who once avoided close dogfights were now chasing the Zero head-on. They could dive faster, roll quicker, and recover from maneuvers that once meant certain death. Each mission became a statement. The Lightning had arrived. The turning of the tide. In early 1944, the 5th and 13th Air Forces began large-scale offensives across New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and the Philippines. The P-38 became their spearhead, flying long-range escort missions that no other fighter could manage. With its twin engines, it could cross hundreds of miles of open ocean, escorting bombers deep into enemy territory. And with McKenna's control fix now standardized, it could fight toe-to-toe with the Zero and win. Pilots called it the fork-tailed devil. Japanese reports confirmed the nickname. 2 planes, 1 pilot, impossible outturn. The Lightning had become a nightmare for Japanese airmen, and a symbol of hope for the Allies. Victories that changed history. From 1943 to 1945, the P-38 dominated some of the most critical battles of the Pacific. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea, 1943 P-38 shredded Japanese convoys with deadly precision. The Raid on Rabaul, 1943, Lightning squadrons neutralized Japan's strongest base in the South Pacific. Operation Vengeance, 1943, 2 P-38s intercepted and killed Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind of Pearl Harbor, flying over Bougainville. Each victory carried echoes of the same small innovation: a tighter wire, a quicker response, a mechanic's unapproved decision that turned defeat into dominance. The sky belonged to the Lightning. By mid-1944, the once invincible Zero had lost its edge. American pilots in P-38s now controlled the air with unmatched confidence. The balance of power had shifted not by numbers, but by ingenuity. Every dogfight told the same story. The P-38 could climb higher, dive faster, and shoot straighter than anything Japan could feel. Its pilots no longer feared the Zero, they hunted it. And behind every victory, hidden in the aircraft's metal frame, was the unseen hand of James McKenna, the forgotten genius who changed how the Lightning flew. Operation Vengeance. the mission that shocked the world. April 18, 1943, Bougainville, South Pacific. The morning was quiet, almost peaceful, but high above the Pacific, 18 American P-38 Lightnings were flying the most secret and most dangerous mission of the war. Their target was not a ship, not a base, but a single man, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy and the architect of Pearl Harbor. The intercept. American intelligence had done the impossible. They had broken Japan's secret naval code and uncovered Yamamoto's personal flight schedule. He would be flying from Rabaul to Bougainville in a twin-engine Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber, escorted by 60 fighters. Time of departure, altitude, route, everything was known. But there was a problem. He would be 400 miles away, far beyond the reach of any Allied fighter, except one, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. The plan, it was called Operation Vengeance, a plan so risky, even its name carried the weight of justice. 18 P-38s from the 339th Fighter Squadron were chosen for the mission. They would fly more than 1,000 miles round trip, skimming the ocean at wave-top height to avoid radar detection. Any mistake or wrong turn, a single radio signal would mean death or capture. Among them were Major John Mitchell, Captain Thomas Lanphier, JRB, and Rex Barber, pilots trained to precision. Their target was the mastermind of Pearl Harbor himself. The moment of truth. At exactly 9:34 am, the P-38s spotted 2 bombers and 60 escorts glinting in the tropical sun. Lanphier and Barber broke formation and climbed hard. The Japanese fighters scrambled, but it was too late. Barber lined up on the lead bomber Yamamoto's aircraft. He fired a long burst. Bullets ripped through the right engine, then the fuselage. The bomber rolled. Its right wing tore away, and it spiraled into the jungle below, exploding on impact. Yamamoto was killed instantly, still strapped in his seat. The second bomber tried to escape, but was also shot down moments later. In less than 10 minutes, the architect of Pearl Harbor was gone. Aftermath. News of the mission was kept secret for months. Officially, Yamamoto's death was a tragic accident, but within Allied circles, the mission became legend, a story whispered among pilots with awe and disbelief. For Japan, it was a devastating psychological blow. The man who had planned the empire's victories was gone, and the message was clear: nowhere was safe. For the men of the 339th Squadron, it was the ultimate act of precision, the proof of what the P-38 Lightning could do when flown by skillful hands. And behind that precision, deep inside every control cable and bolt, still lived James McKenna's forgotten wire, the tiny change that made perfect control possible. How Japan reacted to Yamamoto's death. April 19, 1943, Tokyo, Japan. The news arrived quietly, hidden in coded messages, wrapped in disbelief. Japan's most brilliant naval mind, the architect of its greatest victory, was dead. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the man who planned Pearl Harbor and led Japan's navy to its early triumphs, had been killed in action over Bougainville. His death struck Japan like thunder from a clear sky. A nation in shock. At first, the truth was concealed. Tokyo's high command refused to accept it. No one could believe that the Americans had reached so deep into Japanese airspace, found Yamamoto's plane, and destroyed it with surgical precision. How could they have known his flight plan? How could they have found him in such a vast sky? Whispers spread through the Imperial Navy. Someone must have betrayed him. But soon, the painful truth emerged. It was not betrayal. It was American intelligence, breaking Japan's secret code. The invincible image of the Japanese military had been shattered. The funeral of a legend. On June 5, 1943, Tokyo held one of the most solemn ceremonies of the war. The nation paused. Factories stopped. Radios went silent. Tens of thousands gathered as Yamamoto's ashes were brought home from the jungle of Bougainville. His urn was carried through the capital with full military honors. The emperor himself attended. Flags hung at half-mast. Children bowed in silence. To many Japanese, it felt as though the soul of their navy had died with him. A silent turning point. Yamamoto's death did more than wound morale, it changed the direction of the war. He had been one of the few voices in Japan's leadership who understood the industrial might of the United States. Before the war, he had warned, "If we must fight, we will run wild for 6 months. But after that, I can promise nothing." He was right. Within 6 months of his death, Japan began losing territory at an alarming rate. The U.S. gained control of the skies, the seas, and the initiative. Without Yamamoto's strategic mind, Japan's navy became defensive, uncertain, and divided. The empire that once dreamed of domination was now struggling simply to survive. The American reaction. When news of Yamamoto's death finally became public, the reaction in the United States was electric. Newspapers printed bold headlines: "Vengeance Achieved, Architect of Pearl Harbor Dead." For millions of Americans still mourning the attack that had started the war, it was just as symbolic, powerful, and unforgettable. But among the men who flew the mission, there was no celebration, only silence. Major John Mitchell and his pilots knew they had done their duty, but they also knew what it meant: the death of a great strategist, a man they respected, even as their enemy. The Codebreakers. How the U.S. discovered Yamamoto's secret flight plan. April 13, 1943, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In a quiet, windowless building on the naval base, a small group of men and women stared at a strange message filled with numbers, symbols, and chaos. It looked meaningless, but it wasn't. It was a message from the Imperial Japanese Navy, and hidden within it was the location, time, and route of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's next flight. The unsung war. While soldiers fought on beaches and pilots battled in the skies, another war was being fought in silence. A war of codes and machines, pencils and minds. At the heart of it was Station Hypo, the U.S. Navy's top-secret code-breaking unit in Pearl Harbor, led by Commander Joseph Rockefort, a brilliant, eccentric officer who understood Japan's naval codes better than anyone alive. His team worked day and night, surrounded by coffee cups, scattered papers, and endless radio intercepts. They listened, they decoded, they waited. Then, one morning, they intercepted a message labeled Navy Intelligence Priority A1. It contained Yamamoto's detailed inspection schedule, his flight path, departure time, escort formation, and exact coordinates. It was the break of a lifetime. The dilemma. The message was clear. If the Americans acted on it, they could kill the man responsible for Pearl Harbor. But there was a catch. Doing so would reveal that the U.S. had broken Japan's top-secret naval code, known as JN-25. If the Japanese discovered that, they would change the code immediately, erasing one of the Allies' most powerful advantages. It was a deadly gamble. Should they strike or stay silent? After long debate, the decision came directly from the top. President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself reportedly said, "Get Yamamoto." The preparation. The order was sent to the South Pacific. Every step of the mission was planned in total secrecy. Only a handful of men knew the truth. Even the pilots of the 339th Fighter Squadron were told only that they were to intercept a high-value target. No one mentioned the name Yamamoto. The P-38 Lightnings were chosen for one reason. They were the only fighters with enough range to complete the mission. They were modified, fueled to the limit, and flown with deadly precision. Every second mattered. Every mile counted. The invisible heroes. While the pilots prepared for glory, the real heroes, the codebreakers, remained hidden in the shadows. Men like Rockefort, Thomas Dyer, Agnes Driscoll, and the entire team at Station Hypo had risked everything for this moment. They had stared into static-filled radio transmissions and found meaning where none should exist. They turned patterns into plans, silence into strategy, and because of their brilliance, Yamamoto's exact position was known to the minute. Without them, there would have been no Operation Vengeance. The Shadow War. Inside the secret world of WWII codebreakers, they were never seen. They fought no battles, earned no medals, and their victories remained buried for decades. Yet, without them, the Allies might never have won the war. This is the story of the hidden warriors, the codebreakers, mathematicians, linguists, and spies who fought a silent war inside locked rooms filled with machines, papers, and the constant hum of typewriters. The hidden front lines. While tanks rolled across Europe and bombers filled the skies over the Pacific, an invisible war was being fought underground, in secret bunkers, radio huts, and remote outposts. Every intercepted message, every decoded transmission, was a weapon, and the outcome of battles, even nations, often depended on a single line of broken code. From Bletchley Park in Britain to Station Hypo in Hawaii, from the Enigma rooms of Poland to the Ultra Project in London, the Allies built a hidden empire of information. Their mission: to know what the enemy would do before they did it. The Enigma mystery. At the heart of this shadow war was a machine called Enigma, a complex cipher device used by Nazi Germany to encrypt its communications. Its codes changed every single day, producing billions of possible combinations. To break it seemed impossible, but in 1939, three brilliant Polish mathematicians, Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Oryicki, and Henryk Zygalski, achieved the unthinkable. They cracked the first version of Enigma, laying the foundation for what would become one of the greatest secrets of World War II. When Poland fell, their research was smuggled to France, and later to Britain into the hands of a quiet genius named Alan Turing. Bletchley Park, the brain of the war. Hidden in the English countryside, Bletchley Park became the nerve center of Allied intelligence. Thousands of men and women mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, engineers, and even crossword enthusiasts worked around the clock, deciphering Nazi messages. Inside Hut 8, Turing and his team built a revolutionary machine, the bomb, capable of testing thousands of Enigma settings in minutes. Every time the machine clicked, another piece of the Nazi war machine was exposed. Through their work, the Allies learned the positions of U-boats, predicted Luftwaffe attacks, and guided convoys safely across the Atlantic. Historians estimate their efforts shortened the war by at least 2 years, saving millions of lives. The Pacific Front, the code of silence. While Bletchley cracked Enigma across the ocean, the Americans were waging their own war of intelligence. The Japanese codes, known as JN-25 and Purple, were among the hardest in the world. But by 1942, thanks to cryptologists like Joseph Rockefort and Agnes Driscoll, the US had learned to read Japan's hidden communications. This is what led to the victory at Midway, where American commanders ambushed the Japanese fleet. The secret that spread across the Pacific. August 1943, South Pacific Front. The war in the skies was changing. Japanese pilots, once untouchable in their agile Zeros, began facing an unexpected challenge. The American P-38 Lightnings, once outturned and outgunned, were suddenly flying like predators, sharper, faster, and deadlier. But the high command had no idea why. A whisper among mechanics, on the ground, among the tents and toolboxes. The truth was spreading quietly, passed from one mechanic to another in hushed voices. It began as a rumor. Somewhere in New Guinea, a crewman added a piece of piano wire and turned the Lightning into a monster. At first, no one believed it. But then, squadrons that used to lose half their pilots in dogfights began returning home intact. The change was undeniable. The wire fix had become an underground secret, an unsanctioned modification, shared between men who refused to watch their friends die. Mechanics risked their careers, even court-martial, just to make the change. But they did it anyway, because it worked. The pilots notice. By early 1944, pilots across the Pacific Theater began reporting the same strange thing. The controls feel tighter. The Lightning responds instantly. I can finally turn with the Zero. The modification spread faster than any official memo. From New Guinea to the Solomon Islands, from the Philippines to the Marianas, the McKenna trick became a silent revolution, hidden in plain sight inside the hearts of America's most advanced fighters. Each aircraft carried with it the fingerprints of defiance, the hands of unknown men who tightened bolts and stretched wires, changing the course of air combat one aircraft at a time. Command finds out. When reports reached the U.S. Army Air Force's headquarters, confusion turned into curiosity. Test flights began. Engineers stripped down modified P-38s and discovered the cause: a small 6-inch wire, carefully added to the control linkage. At first, officers were furious. Unauthorized modifications were forbidden. Regulations were sacred. But then, they saw the data: tighter control response, better roll rate, shorter reaction times, and most importantly, pilots surviving dogfights they once couldn't win. Instead of punishment, the idea was approved. The modification was redesigned, standardized, and eventually incorporated into later aircraft systems. A legacy beyond the manuals. By war's end, the piano wire trick had become part of aviation legend. But for years, few knew the name behind it: Technical Sergeant James McKenna. He never received medals, nor fame, nor headlines. He went home quietly, just another mechanic who had done his duty. But in the skies over the Pacific, his idea lived on, saving lives, turning battles, and reminding history that sometimes the smallest change makes the biggest difference. How the U-boats nearly won the Atlantic War. The Atlantic Ocean, 1942. Cold, endless, silent. Beneath its dark waves lurked a deadly shadow: the U-boat, Germany's silent killer. They were the wolves of the sea, hunting in packs, striking without warning, and vanishing into the deep before the enemy even knew what had happened. This was the Battle of the Atlantic, the longest, most crucial battle of World War II. And for a time, it looked like the Allies were going to lose it. The Wolf Packs, led by Admiral Karl Dönitz, Germany unleashed hundreds of U-boats into the Atlantic. They moved like predators, silent, disciplined, deadly. Dönitz called them wolf packs. Each submarine carried about 40 men, packed into metal tubes barely large enough to stand in. The air stank of oil and sweat. The walls dripped with condensation, and every sound echoed like a heartbeat. But to these men, the ocean was home, and their prey was the Allied convoy. Night after night, they struck. Merchant ships carrying food, oil, weapons, and soldiers to Britain went down in flames. Torpedoes hit like thunder. Bodies and cargo vanished into the deep. By early 1943, the U-boats had sunk over 1,000. Allied ships nearly cutting off Britain's lifeline completely. Britain on the brink. For the people of Britain, survival depended on the sea. Every loaf of bread, every bullet, every drop of fuel came by ship. When the U-boat struck, the lights of London dimmed, and fear grew across the island. Prime Minister Winston Churchill later admitted, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. If the U-boat succeeded, Britain would starve, and the war in Europe would be lost." The turning point, the secret, were beneath the waves. But the Allies were not helpless. Hidden deep inside the intelligence centers of Britain and America, the codebreakers at Bletchley Park and Station X worked around the clock to decipher the messages between German U-boats and their command center. Every U-boat sent daily reports using the Enigma code. When the Allies cracked it, they suddenly knew the wolves' positions, their routes, their ambush points, even when they surfaced to refuel. Armed with this information, the Royal Navy began to hunt the hunters. Technology joins the battle. In the skies above the ocean, long-range patrol planes, Liberators, Catalinas, and Sunderlands scanned the waves with new radar systems that could detect submarines even at night. Meanwhile, Allied ships used sonar ASTIC to track submarines underwater. Depth charges, explosives set to detonate at certain depths, became the new weapon of fear for the U-boat crews. The hunter had become the hunted. The turning tide. In May 1943, the battle reached its climax. The Allies, guided by codebreakers and radar, destroyed 41 U-boats in a single month. The losses were devastating. For every convoy sunk, 2 U-boats were now being destroyed.